There's a difference between putting on a session and coaching a session. I get a little bit frustrated when I hear talk about attacking coaches, and my game model is based around an attacking style of play. Fantastic, but not one team in the world has 100% possession of the ball. I know if I want to have a long career in this profession that you have to consistently adapt, you have to evolve, you have to be resilient, you have to have thick skin, you have to understand you're going to get criticized, and you have to be big enough and strong enough and bold enough to accept it.
Hello coaches, welcome back to another Modern Soccer Coach interview. Joining us today is Anthony Pulis, Real Salt Lake assistant coach MLS. Phenomenal journey in the game, experiences as a player in the professional game, as a coach, as a head coach, assistant coach, expansion teams, MLS teams, pro teams, teams with a defensive record. There's so much in this. Development, improvement, adapting, evolving. I hope you enjoy it. Please like, please subscribe so you don't miss any more of the interviews. Please check out all the content over on modernsoccercoach.com. Thank you so much for the support. Here is Anthony. Enjoy. Anthony, thanks so much for joining me today on the Modern Soccer Coach podcast. Really, really excited to chat.
Yeah, no, thanks, Gary. It's a pleasure. I've been an avid listener for a long time, so it's a pleasure to be on and have a chat with you.
Brilliant, brilliant. Well, appreciate that first and foremost. Kind of a strange question. I was putting this together with okay, let's go with the direction of a coaching journey, adapting to different roles and adapting to the game in different ways, blah, blah, blah. But then also the first question, which I suppose inspired by the overlap where the boys are all laughing, ex-pros, about who on earth would want to do this job in today's day and age with the noise and the pressure. And I've been thinking about that for a few weeks. Do you think the position has changed in coaching over the last 5 years? And is it less desirable perhaps than what it once was?
I don't know. I think it probably changes from person to person and what generation of person that you would speak to. I've obviously been fortunate that I've grown up around the game my whole life, and I've seen firsthand what management can look like. And I'm sure we'll touch on it as we go through the podcast and chat. I do think it's obviously changed drastically over probably the last 5 to 10 years. I think specifically now, social media. And I think we live in a world now where everybody wants instant success. Everybody now has a smartphone, and you tap on an app and you can have food delivered to your door and all these different things at the click of a button. And I think we now live in a football world where fans, owners, upper management expect a lot of the time instant success. So with that comes added pressure. I think the generation of player that we're working with now, human beings evolve. So the players that we're working with now are vastly different to maybe what they were 5, 10, 15, 20 years ago, and just the way that they are and the motivations that they have and how they deal with successes and failures. How do you speak to them now as opposed to maybe what I was spoken to like as a young player sort of 15, 20 years ago. So I think, again, for me personally, I'm in love with the game of football. I have been my whole life, and I feel really fortunate enough to have played professionally for a number of years, albeit I would consider myself a pretty average player, but was able to forge somewhat of a career. And now I've been able to be coaching now full time for what's 10 years now. And I know if I want to have a long career in this profession, that you have to consistently adapt. You have to evolve with the times. I think the best managers over the course of, again, the last sort of 15, 20 years are the ones that have evolved, have adapted, that are curious, that are open-minded to new ideas, to new ways of working. Again, adapting to the generation of player that we're working with, because at the end of the day, it's about players, and this game, this industry is still, how do we get the best out of players that are going to get you results that keep you in the game? Because at the end of the day, at the professional level, that's what it's all about. So I think for me, I feel like I'm obsessed with the game, and I would imagine that the majority of other professional coaches are like that. And this is why we do it. It's because we love the game of football first and foremost. We have a real passion for wanting to to teach and help players improve and ultimately win games of football at the weekend, which is obviously what we get paid to do.
I think the reason why I love that podcast, that the overlap, is that the fact that you get that insight of ex-pros that you've watched and you've seen play, and then you talk about the game and they talk about managers and you see different perspectives. And just to go back there was Patrice Evra. I don't know if you've watched this one.
I actually just listened to that one this morning when I was in the gym. Yeah.
Very interesting.
Really good. Juventus
stuff.
Yes, the difference in the training at Juventus compared to Man United, the preparation for games, and really, really interesting. Yeah, sorry.
What did you think about him going to Ferguson and Alex Butner was starting? What did you think about that?
Yeah, and again, I'm laughing as I'm listening to that because I think about, again, I'm obviously going to relate this to my own experiences, right? And so I think about myself as a young player growing up in England, and again, the way that it was then is that you don't go to the manager and ask what I would consider that to be a silly question, because you probably know what you're going to get. However, the way the players are now, they obviously feel more empowered and more comfortable to have those conversations with coaches, which depends which way you look at it. Maybe it's not a bad thing that they feel comfortable to have these conversations with coaches and managers. And it was interesting, even listening to that podcast with the overlap with Evra. He even spoke about Ferguson had spoke to him about they were going to change form. United were playing 4-4-2 in the league, but they were getting to that stage where they wanted to change and play 4-3-3 in Europe because they didn't want to get overloaded in midfield. And interesting how Ferguson actually went and asked some players that. And again, really, from the outside, you would never have imagined Sir Alex Ferguson going and just making sure that the players were comfortable with a certain tactical approach. You would think he would be so comfortable in his own skin with his coaching staff to go, right, this is what we think is going to be the right thing to do. Let's go and do it. And I think, again, great lesson for all of us as coaches to understand at the end of the day, the players are the ones that are going out there and executing. So how do you make sure that they're completely bought in? And again, there's an art to how you ask these questions, but if they're not bought in and they're not 100% behind it, then it becomes very difficult. So yeah, really interesting. And again, like how things have changed. And even Gary Neville, I think, made a comment on there about he would never have dreamt of asking a question like that. So even that little insight, again, as to Gary Neville's come through the academy at Manchester United, probably from the age of probably 11, 12, whatever it was. So there's no way I could ask the boss that question. But then Evra comes in, completely different background, feels a little bit more comfortable to have that conversation. So again, lessons for us on how we have to adapt and how do we approach these conversations with players.
The piece as well on, I think it was the same side, maybe in the same segment of conversation where Neville said that, and then Rooney goes, or no, they said the point of Rooney and said he would do it in person, he would do it in front of people.
Yeah.
Do you think there's an unwritten rule or something that you have to adapt, is that as you move up the ladder, you think as a coach initially that I want to work with the top players because I can do A, B, C, but you also trade off that with those top players, there's some big personalities go along with it?
Yeah, 100%. I think, again, as coaches, we're all ambitious and we all want to work at the highest level we can. And maybe the way that you would coach and teach and lead an academy group of players naturally has to be different when you're working with senior players. And obviously the higher you go at the professional level and you start to now come across bigger egos, players that have potentially played at the highest level for even a longer time than I've coached. Like again, we'll probably touch on it as we go through this conversation. I've had some fantastic experiences here so far in the States. Orlando Kaká was there. So world superstar, like pinch me moments where you're like, what's going on here? You're coaching one of the best players that the world's seen. Into Miami, we had Gonzalo Higuain, Blaise Matuidi. So I think, again, just understanding how do you adapt? How do you evolve? But at the same time, Gary, you've got to be authentic. And I think you've got to understand that there's a balance and there's a line. And sometimes, and I've experienced this firsthand, is if you feel like a certain player is stepping over a line, then you have to be strong, because otherwise, I also feel like players are really smart and they'll sniff out maybe a weakness or a sign of what they perceive weakness, and then that can be where it gets really tricky. So, not saying you rule with an iron fist all the time, but I think there has to be this line and just, again, this authenticity of who you are as a coach. What are your beliefs? What are your non-negotiables with behaviors of players, and making sure players are clear on that as well. And I think, and again, my own experiences have shown, I think if you're true to yourself, if you're clear on expectations, clear on non-negotiables, and then you follow through with that, so your actions actually meet your words. Because I've seen a lot of coaches as well that will say the right things, and in certain situations arise, and maybe the actions then don't match the words. And that's when you start to maybe fall into a trap of, all right, you start to lose respect and trust of certain parts of the dressing room. So it's a fascinating topic. The biggest thing for me is we have to stay current. We have to understand the type of player that we're dealing with now. Agents, they've got, again, hundreds of thousands of people following them on social media that will be saying certain things to them after maybe good performances, not so good performances. So yeah, there's so much that we have to think about when we start to think about how we lead and manage the modern day player.
Yeah, there's subplots going on all over the place, isn't there?
There is. Yeah, it's everywhere. It's everywhere. And I think, again, sometimes personally, I'm sure a lot of coaches will relate, is we just get wrapped up in this world of player A is a footballer and he's actually a human being. And there's so many things that are going on behind the scenes within his life that maybe we aren't aware of. And hence why I think it's so important that there's always this constant flow of communication and trying to check in with players. And if you're fortunate enough to be at a club where there's a decent sized staff, that you can kind of delegate, and certain staff members will take care of certain parts of the group to make sure that we're all aware of where they're at in their lives. Things that, again, might be problematic with a partner, with a parent, with a pet. You don't know. And sometimes player X has been poor today in training, his head wasn't right. Well, okay, do we need to have a conversation and figure out what's going on in his personal life first? What could be affecting that? Has he been affected by a bunch of criticism from keyboard warriors on Twitter or Instagram, and then so how can that help us in the way that we coach and lead that certain individual as well?
That aspect of adapting and then staying authentic that you talked about, when you go to, again, sometimes as coaches, we're led to believe that it's all about creating the environment and creating the culture. But often when you're going into jobs and roles, the culture's already there. So let's talk about that, going into an environment and kind of reading and staying authentic and navigating through how you kind of observe and read all the non-negotiables in there. How do you go through that?
Well, I think for me, Gary, it starts with some due diligence prior. So I think it's really important before you get yourself into a new job or a new club, is that you've done some prior research. And for me, that is really phone calls, and it's trying to speak to people that are currently working there or have previously worked at the club, players, even certain agents that you might have good relationships with, that they've had a player there in the past, front office staff, physios. I think, again, just through years of experience, you don't realize how many sort of contacts you've got that might know people in and around the environment. So I think having those phone calls first is important, just to get a lay of the land. So as you go in, you're already kind of maybe aware of certain things to look out for. And then once you're in the environment, again, I'll come back to the communication piece. I think it's having conversations with as many people as you can early on, to find out about them, but then also be quite strategic in questions that you can ask. And I always like asking questions about how prior coaches have worked. What were the sessions like? What were the video sessions like? Same thing with maybe trainers, physios, equipment managers, because then I think quite quickly you kind of get an idea of certain people might be overly critical and might say certain things that you might sense, all right, well, that's a little bit maybe over the line. And then for me, and obviously in the coaching world, you quickly pick a lot of things up in those first few training sessions. So just good old standards, habits. What do the players' attitudes look like? How open to coaching? How open to learning are they? Again, even little things like rondos, like a simple 5v2 box, a player's doing it properly. So I'm talking about the two in the middle. Are they pressing properly? Are they trying to win the ball back quickly? The guys around the outside, are they passing the ball properly? Are they on their toes? Is there good communication? There's so many little nuances and things that you can pick up on early on that just give you an idea of, all right, what's the training culture here is fantastic. Great. We don't have to really worry too much about, or, okay, I'm seeing a lot of things here that are a little bit loose and a little bit sloppy, and we're going to need to make sure that we tweak and adjust certain things. The other thing is video sessions, Gary. So again, just in this day and age where there's so much video, and I think it's, again, as we talk about how the game's evolved and adapted, huge part of the game now, when you ask questions. So putting a clip up. And again, I think at the beginning, it's important that you create expectations and let the players understand why you're going to ask questions. Another tweak of how the modern day player is, they want to know the why. But again, you ask a question and dead silence. Okay, well, maybe there's not been a culture of teaching and questions in the past. So how are players going to adapt to this? Or you've got 5 or 6 players, bam, they're saying the right thing. You go, okay. So with all these little things, and as each day goes by, then you start to pick up certain things. And I think the biggest thing for me, and the way I believe you find out about a true person's character and a culture, is when maybe things aren't going well. So if you've not had a great performance, you've maybe not had some good results, maybe the training sessions haven't been right, certain players have been left out of the lineup, how do people respond and react to those situations? So yeah, there's so many things. Timekeeping's a big one for me, Gary. Again, I think that's just a huge sign of respect. If players are on time, they're in the gym doing their pre-activation at the correct time, they're turning up to the video room for the meetings, they're on the field early, ready to go. Again, they're late, there's looseness, bus arrival, flight arrivals, all these things I think just give you a really good idea of where things are. And then from there, how do you start to adapt and potentially try and tweak certain things within the parameters of your own specific role on a staff as well, by the way.
We've also got the novelty over here of expansion teams and that starting from fresh, which you've experienced that with Inter Miami. How challenging is it then to go in, and you mentioned Higuain earlier, establish those there? Was that tough?
It was incredibly difficult. It was, again, I look back, it was really challenging at the time, Gary, and now I look back and learn so many lessons from that experience. As you say, it was an expansion team. It was brand new. We had a brand new staff that got put together really late. We all met each other. I think it was probably 4 days before the first preseason training session. It was Diego Alonso, who's a Uruguayan coach, had good success in Mexico. He'd won the CONCACAF Champions League twice with 2 different teams. He brought some staff members with him. I was brought in separately. There was some analysts brought in separately. Another goalkeeper coach, brought in separately. So it was kind of all thrown together. The head coach hadn't had really any say in the recruitment. So the squad or the roster had all been put together prior through the sporting director and his recruitment team. So straight off the bat, I knew going into it, this is going to be incredibly challenging, and it's going to be really interesting to see how we try and mesh this. Add into the melting pot, you have certain members of staff that only speak Spanish and no English. You have certain members of staff that are only speaking English. You have this big divide within the playing squad of good, solid MLS veterans, mostly English speaking. Then you sprinkle in some younger South American players that really only speak Spanish. So really challenging. The preseason was a little bit messy as well. Again, the head coach and the technical staff didn't really have an awful lot of say in where we were going to go for preseason camp, when we wanted the games. So there was some conflict. Well, we want to get some more training sessions in before the first game. And then as it gets towards the end, not enough games. So there's all these different conflicting opinions about how certain things should be done. Lose the first 2 games of the season, and then COVID hits. So you kind of get into this training rhythm, finally, of how the head coach wants it to look, and the staff are clear. This is the periodization model. Players are starting to get an idea of, all right, this is how we want to play. the cultural piece is going really, really slowly, and day by day it's getting a little bit better. Then obviously we all go into lockdown, so we don't see each other for a number of weeks. So then everything is done on Zoom, daily Zoom meetings around certain cultural pieces, but then a lot of tactical video where we're putting players in groups and trying to make the most of that. And then you start to go into the individual and the small group training. So it was incredibly difficult, Gary, I think, with how the world was at that time. And so many lessons that I've took from that, and it's easy from an assistant coach position sometimes, where you're like, well, probably should be doing an extra team bonding event here, and maybe we should be having an extra meeting or two there, and so that the players have got a better understanding of each other as people and as human beings as opposed to footballers. And maybe that might start to create some more bonds and some more togetherness and more cohesion if they've understood where they've all come from and their backgrounds and their interests and things like that. So it's really difficult. We obviously ended up, I think we made that playing game as it was that at the end of that year. Unfortunately, Diego and a few of his staff members lost his job, and then I was fortunate enough to stay on staff as Phil Neville came in, and year two was completely different. I think Phil and Diego were both very different leaders, both very different coaches in the way that they wanted to balance what I would say the tactical side of the game, but then also the man management side of the game and the psychological part. And Phil was really intentional about making sure there was way more clarity on just basic values and expectations and what we want training to look like, how we expect players to behave, professionalism, discipline, things like that. So great learning for me to really work with two different coaches with different ideas, both really authentic and obviously have both had excellent careers as players and obviously now coaching. So it's really challenging. And I always think I don't think people realize how difficult expansion is. And I look from afar at when Charlotte came in a few years ago, and now San Diego are coming in this year. And there's been enough now where you'd like to think people in those leadership positions have done their due diligence and have done a real deep dive into the things that these expansion teams have done well, and then maybe the mistakes that they've made to try and obviously allow them to be as successful as they can.
Hello, coaches. We'll take a quick break here. If you are starting up the season and you're looking for some new ideas with session design or some new ideas on periodization or just building sessions, please check out the new content over on modernsoccercoach.com. We are up to 2 new articles a week, and there's loads more of resources, of ebooks, of webinars in the Modern Soccer Coach shop as well, modernsoccercoach.com/shop. Please check it out. Please share it with the coaching community. We've also got the Modern Soccer Coach online analysis course as well. That's been really, really popular. We launched it a couple of months ago. We're getting some great feedback on it. We'd love for you to take a look at that. modernsoccercoach.com/analysis. Thank you so much for the support. Back to Anthony.
Let's talk about Miami FC. Obviously, watching you doing the analysis, 17 clean sheets in one season. Like, that's incredible. A lot of people talk about the game models and starting off, but I think it gets overlooked today on defensive cohesion. How would you describe the process of creating a framework around a club that can get 17 clean sheets?
Yeah, it's an interesting one for me, Gary, because when I think about the game of football and people, the question always is, what's your playing philosophy, your game model, what's your ideas on the game? And I always think the best teams are the most well-balanced teams. And that comes, again, so your defensive organization, how you're going to attack, how you transition to defense, how you're going to transition from defense to attack, what you like attacking and defending restarts. There's so many things that go into it. And I look at I'll use Arsenal as an example, as a team that I've watched a lot over the last couple of years. And they're so well balanced in every moment of the game. There's such clarity of roles for each of those players in every single phase of the game, whether they're pressing from goal kicks, whether they're pressing from the mid-block, whether they're defending around the box, their behaviors in transition, their rotations and their structure in build-up play, how they finish attacks, set pieces. They're incredible both sides of the ball. So I just think, again, I get a little bit frustrated when I hear talk about attacking coaches, and my game model is based around an attacking style of play. Fantastic, but not one team in the world has 100% possession of the ball. So, and again, this is why we love this game, because there's so many different ideas and philosophies around it. And I just think, for whatever reason, saying you want to be defensively organized, defensively sound, difficult to play against is almost like unfashionable, which frustrates me a little bit, because I think it's a huge part of the game. We see it at the top level. So now, how do I implement that with the team? But as a head coach, and obviously I can talk about a little bit my role as an assistant at Salt Lake right now. But for me, it's about creating expectations. So again, the first thing is, for me, everybody should be defending. So all 10 outfield players and the goalkeeper have a responsibility and have a role wherever the ball is, in whatever phase of the game we are when we don't have it. So being really clear, really open and transparent, that the expectation is everybody defends. And then I think it comes through a daily process of training sessions and video. And I think we as coaches have to get this understanding of how each player, they learn differently. Some of them are going to learn by doing, some of them are going to learn by maybe looking at a tactics board. Some of them, and the majority of them now, if they'll tell you they like video and they learn from looking at video clips. So for me, it's how do you get that nice balance between all of those? And I'll give you a snapshot of how that season, how we built it through pre-season, is we would always start with our defending from the front. And that, again, for me, we had two different structures that year. The majority of the time we would defend 4-4-2. And then we had certain games where we might defend in a 5-2-3. So there's certain games where we would do it based off opponents. Sometimes it'd be based off personnel that we had. Sometimes in game, we might be seeing some situations we might have to tweak. But I wanted the players to be really clear and really comfortable defending in either of those two structures. Principles would never change. We'd always work off certain principles. So we'd start off pressing high from goal kicks. There would be video clips that we would show. There would be some still images. There might be some animations. Then we'd go and train it. And we got into a rhythm of always wanting to show some visuals first. So the players would see it in the video room. Then we'd go out and execute within the training session. And then obviously, then we'd move it back. And how are we going to defend the middle of the pitch, defend the halfway line, defend the box? Then how do we transition and press out of that? So for me, it's about layering it up. It's about being really clear. One of the things I always wanted, and I always still think is, even in my role as an assistant now, is when the players walk over the white line, they're really clear on what their role is. Whether that, and also as you go through it, and I think utopia is the left back knowing exactly what the right winger should be doing when the ball's in a certain position. The right-sided centre back knows what the forward to the left of the 4-4-2 should be doing in a certain situation if the opponent's building up with 2 or 3. It takes time. So for me, it's this real deep, granular detail that you have to go into on a daily basis, and you have to just build layers. And for me, it's the visuals, and it's, again, just going through some really game-like scenarios on the training field. And I'm sure we'll talk about that as we go through this as well, but trying to put them in realistic situations in training, and ultimately put them in a situation where they know what's expected when they walk over the white line. And then the other thing as well is buy-in, Gary. So I think once you start to get clean sheets, we would use it. We would use it as almost like a motivation of, like, I don't know, after 10 games of the season, we'd already had 6 clean sheets. And when you're top of that clean sheet chart, guys, look how difficult this is to play against. Then all of a sudden you start getting them talking about it. Maybe some things start to drip into the media, and then the opposition start thinking, this team, they don't concede goals. So then all of a sudden you start playing into the psyche a little bit as well. And for me, again, player profiles, like the recruitment piece, is making sure that you're recruiting players that want to press, that want to run, want to cover their teammates, and buy into this culture of team first.
Yeah, I always remember the distances between the centre midfielders and the centre backs was minimal to none. The relationship between you would give up nothing in that space centrally.
Yeah. Well, I think for me, Gary, that's probably defensive principle number 1 is get compact and protect the middle. That again is, and I'm sure the vast majority of coaches, if not all of them, probably the same thing. So in order to be compact, you need tight distances from top to bottom, from side to side. And then it becomes a case of how do you press out of certain situations? What if a certain player gets beaten? What's our cover position like? What's our emergency defending like if, again, a player for whatever reason has been caught asleep, or the opposition do something different that maybe we weren't expecting that's created an overload? And it comes back to like, what are you? I always think with defending, Gary, it's what are you willing to give up? Like you have to give something up. With how big a football pitch is, you can't with 10 outfield players. There's only certain number of spaces you can protect. So as a coach, what do you want to give up? You want to give up maybe the space in front and the space outside. Brilliant. Make sure the players are clear on that. Maybe again, you have a back four that are really quick and you're really comfortable defending 1v1 situations with 60 yards of space behind them. Then you can set your line higher and you can be more aggressive and you can maybe take some more risks in pressing in certain situations. But you don't have centre-backs that aren't great defending space behind them and aren't comfortable 1v1, and you have to go +1, and you want your central midfield players to give them more protection. Then what does that look like to the forwards? Now, their positions have to adjust. Have you got fullbacks that are comfortable, again, really being aggressive? Great, then you can adjust your wingers. If you don't, then maybe you need wingers that are going to do a little bit more running than maybe what they've been used to give your fullbacks protection in certain areas. And there's so many different things that go into it. And I think, again, as coaches, we have to understand, who are we? What do we want it to look like? But then also, is it going to fit the profile and the attributes of the players that we have currently got at first team level? And over time, you can recruit different types of profiles to fit what you want. But initially, it's about, how do you get the best out of the players? How are you, again, difficult to play against, both sides of the ball? And then creating this buy-in and getting everybody working together as one unit. Because if you've got everybody working together as one unit when you don't have the ball, again, everybody knows it's going to be difficult to play against.
Yeah, brilliant. Well, what does that look like then from a recruitment standpoint? When, of course, data world today, you're going to get 20 statistics on a midfielder per se, but say, how do you read whether they're going to really embrace?
Yeah, well, I think each club I've been at have done it slightly differently, but I think the vast majority now, you've got certain filters that you will go through regarding certain like data metrics and data points that you want to make sure they hit. Then it's obviously it's the old fashioned, like, watching games. So I think specifically with defenders, what I've tended to do is you watch them obviously in full games, but then I've actually gone back and watched the goals that their team has conceded in the past. So I think you quickly start to get an idea of, it's a fullback and he's not defending the back post well. He's always detached from his weak side centre back. There's always these gaps that start to appear. His body shape's closed. He's always ball watching. So you'll start to quickly see, all right, well, there's certain behaviours here that are a real red flag to defend, specifically in our back four setup. Centre backs, similar things, like what are they like defending the box? What's their body shape look like when the opposition have time on the ball? Are they side on? Are they already starting to get ready to drop because there's a threat behind? Or are they caught square and they're caught unawares and they get done with one ball? So many different behaviours. And I think, again, specific to you as a coach, and what are your non-negotiables? What are your specific positional profiles that you're not willing to give up on? And then I think you need to have a list of things that, all right, well, maybe I'm willing to give up in one or two of these certain areas of their game, because maybe there are things that it's not going to be a huge issue for us. We can adjust certain things around them, or we can coach them up. And these are things that we can help correct. And if they are positional things, maybe these are things that we can help improve them just with our training sessions, our video sessions, things like that. So I think, again, there's so many different pieces that go into it. We might have a bunch of right-footed centre-backs already in the group. Well, we need a left-footed centre-back. Like, this is important for us. Maybe we want to, because of the way we want to attack and build up, it's really important we get left-sided centre-back. But all right, well, if we want that, maybe we're going to have to give up. Maybe it might not be the quickest. So how's that going to, what's more important to us? Is it more important to have that left-footed centre-back to give us more balance in our build-up play? But is it going to hurt us that much where we can't play a high line? And how do we adjust? So, and again, I think this is why we love the game so much, because there's so many things that go into it. But I always go back to, like, again, as coaches, I think having having this real clarity on what you want, and what are the non-negotiables for you, what are you not willing to give up on, I think is really important to it as well.
Yeah, brilliant. The role in Orlando, you've worked in different kind of roles alongside the development pathway, and I'm fascinated by how that changes from obviously a young player going into full-time football. It's becoming a job. There's a transition. Then there's the reality. How do you adapt as a coach working with different players at different levels of the journey?
I think you learn on the job, to be honest, Gary. I think I obviously played my last 3 years. My last 3 years of my playing career were in Orlando, but I already knew. I knew years before then I wanted to go into coaching. So I think going into my period in Orlando, even when I was playing, I was already starting to go out and coach in the academy 2 or 3 nights a week. And I think early on, I was working with the really younger age groups, like 8s, 9s, 10s. I knew straight away this is not the age group and the level I want to coach at. It was challenging, it was difficult. But then you start, like, I'm going into it with these ideas of, all right, well, I'm going to try and do this session, and I've seen a coach at first team level put this session on, or this pass and drill, and then you quickly realize, no, I'm miles off it. Like that is not going to work. So a lot of it, I think, is just learning on a job. Then how do you speak to these young boys and girls that you're coaching? How do you get their attention? How are they gonna retain information? Are they gonna retain information by maybe you asking them a question? Is it by you telling them? Is it by you stopping the session and pointing to maybe 2 or 3 kids in one area that are doing an activity well, and it's like that's how it should look. Have a look at those. So for me, it's just been about learning on the job and a lot of trial. And in those first 2 or 3 years working with the younger age groups, and as it went on, I was lucky then the club started to push me up, and I'd start working with 13, 14, 15-year-olds. So a lot of trial and error, a lot of self-reflection, a lot of every session I would make sure, again, I documented. Back then, I wasn't using a digital coaching platform. It was literally just me writing my sessions in a journal and in a book. And so I'd make my session plan for 14 players. I'd get there and there'd be 11. And then I'd panic and I'd realize, all right, I'm going to have to adjust and change this. So then after the session, I'd go home and I'd go, right, what was good? What wasn't good? If I do this again, what do I need to change next time? So, and that's not changed, like even now. And I think just, again, this is purely for experience. And even players now that I'm coaching that say they want to go into coaching and they ask for advice. And I say the best advice I can give you is go and get your feet wet. Go and find a team somewhere that you can just start to experiment. Like, what area size do you need to do a 4v4 plus 3 in for an under 12s group? And then how might that adjust if you're now working with better players at U16 level? What's your style? Like, how are you going to speak to players? How direct can you be? So maybe for me, going through the different age groups in Orlando and then getting up to work with the U18s, okay, well now, all right, these are young men. Now, if their attitude's not right, or they've not started the session off and I don't feel like the mentality's right on point, maybe I can stop it and get into them. So the first time you get into them a little bit, and maybe you're a little bit sterner and a bit firmer than what you've been with some of the younger age. How do they react? All right, well, they've actually reacted really well here because there's been a big improvement. Okay, so they can take it, but can't be doing it every 2 minutes because then it goes in one ear and out the other. So just this, for me, it's just constant self-reflection, constant, again, early days, trial and error. And then you start to figure out, okay, which of these players do you feel like have got a real chance and you feel like there's some real potential here to go on and potentially have a career at the professional level, and really honing in on them and finding out what they're like as people, what are their motivations like, getting an idea of their background, family. And then from there, again, just through your own intuition and your own experiences, how do I need to manage that person? Again, is it direct? Is it arm around the shoulder? Is it showing video? Is it pulling them at the end? I was fortunate to have this as a young player where, and I've used it with a lot of players, is I was a central midfield player, and one of the coaches I played for when I was younger at Portsmouth was always on to me. You're always keeping the ball. Your ball retention rates are really high, but you're not playing enough forward passes. So every time we play a small-sided game, you cannot play a pass backwards or square. So everyone else is just playing a small-sided game. I'm conditioned to do something different. So if now I start to think about my body shape. how am I now supporting the player on the ball? Because I know I can't play this ball back or I can't play it square. And if I do, the coach is going to blow the whistle and give it to the team. So I've used things like that with higher potential younger players, giving them certain things within training that, all right, I'm not telling everyone else, I'm just telling you to help you in your development. Because when you get up to train with the first team, hopefully, the expectation from those first team players, those number 10s and those 9s and those wingers, they want the ball quickly. So if you're a central midfield player and you're receiving it from fullbacks and centre backs and you're playing back and square, they're going to get frustrated and they're going to get on you. So how can you be in the best position possible so that when you go up, you're ready to succeed from a tack standpoint, but then from a mental and emotional standpoint as well, and trying to prepare younger players for, like critical professionals that are late 20s, early 30s that are used to certain things, and how are they expecting from their teammates from a work ethic standpoint, from a technical, tactical standpoint. And for me, again, I loved my time in Orlando because I go back now sometimes and delivered hundreds of sessions. And there were days, Gary, where I would be in with the first team in the morning as an assistant. I would go and help they had a PDL team. I would go and help the PDL team after the first team. In the evening, I'd be going and coaching with the 16s or the 18s. So I'm going through days where I'm in and around 3 different training sessions, absolutely exhausted by the end of the day. And times when you're like, where's this going? And I look, and it was invaluable, just purely by just doing hours and hours of sessions. And you just figure out who you are as a coach, who you are as a leader. And again, what sessions work, what don't work, what do players like, what don't they like? And then just constantly taking the temperature. Like, what do the group need right now? Where are they at? Do they need me getting into them about certain details with our defensive structure and shape and our pressing? Or is it, they've had enough of that this week? We're going to set you up in a game. They know what the expectations behavior are. Stand back, observe, let them play. And I just go back to, I think it just comes through experience and just purely just coaching hours.
Obvious question, but you mentioned Kaka earlier. What was it about when you saw him up close or on a daily basis? What made you say the way he handled himself went, that's why he is where he is?
So he was the first one in the gym every single morning, and he was probably one of the last ones to leave in the afternoon. So he brought with him his own physical trainer from Brazil. So again, that was the first year that Orlando, it was actually my first year of full-time coaching. The club had just transitioned from USL to MLS. He's obviously the main marquee signing. And then you hear certain whispers and rumors of this guy's top, incredible human being, really humble, really respectful, really friendly, top professional. So you start to hear all these things, but then you're like, all right, well, what does it really look like? And as I said, he was, Silas was his personal, his physical condition training guy was in the gym. I'm not kidding you, would be in there for probably an hour before training. Series of core stability exercises, Pilates, yoga, flexibility. Then he would go through his routine. He'd have like a massage routine, different mobility activities that he would go through just to make sure that his body was in the right position to then go and train. And then again, at that point, Gary, he was at the end of his career. So naturally he wasn't as quick and as explosive as what he was in his younger days. Excuse me. But just watching him in a passing drill and in simple possession games, everything he did was spot on. His body shape, his first touch. And we talk to the players a lot about like just how you pass the ball in a passing drill, like zipping the ball along the surface, inside of the foot, really crisp, really clean. Again, first touch, away from pressure, everything, all the little details that you speak to players about, he executed to an incredibly high level. But it was so powerful for the rest of the group, Gary, because then the players are seeing it close up. So they're seeing him in the gym early. Naturally now, you've got a number of other players in and around the group, especially younger ones, going, well, that's what it takes to get to the highest level. Maybe I need to start doing that. So I'm now going to arrive 30 minutes earlier than what I was doing before. And you start to see they're starting to copy certain exercises that he's doing. And then they start to speak to his physical trainer. So then they start to get an idea, right, well, I need to start doing this if I want to have a longer career. And again, just those habits, those standards, those behaviors that he would that he would show in training. Yeah, it kind of just goes through the group, and it becomes a perfect example for a coach, because then the other players can just look and see, well, that's how it should look. That's how you should behave if you want to be a top level professional. So great experience to see that up close.
Question I had to ask was, I want specifically where, like, with your seeing and being around your dad, and obviously the information he gets with the experience, like, how much have you taken from his training mentality or approach to it?
Yeah, it's an interesting one, Gary, because I think, again, a lot of people will ask me similar questions based around dad, and I get it. He's obviously been an incredibly successful coach. I think he coached over 1,000 games and coached in the Premier League for a number of years and went through all the divisions. So I'm naturally proud of him, but I'm also really self-aware, and I understand he's quite a polarizing figure, because there's certain people that will be critical of his playing style, and then there'll be others that will have respect for his longevity and his ability to get results and get the best out of players. I think that one of the biggest things I've taken, probably one of the biggest bits of advice I've got from dad was early on, just starting to coach and put sessions on. He would always say that there's a difference between putting on a session and coaching a session. So he's like, there's loads of coaches out there that will put art, the setup will look great, and the cones are clean and the mannequins are in the right spot and the poles and everything's really professional, which is a huge value to that. But then the session starts, and maybe it starts to break down and it goes wrong, and coaches don't say anything. And okay, well, at what point are you going to now start to deliver a message? Now, do you start to realize that maybe you need to add a condition or two? It might not be you stopping it and coaching verbally, but maybe now you need to understand there needs to be an extra tweak regarding a touch restriction, or an extra zone here, or whatever it might be, to get out a behavior of what you want from that session. So that's something I've always been quite intentional with, Gary, is making sure, it's always stuck in my mind, is make sure I'm coaching a session. So there's an objective to it. The players understand why we're doing it, but then what are you going to do within that to make sure you're putting the players in the best position possible to get that out? And it's not just the session looks great, but then the players leave the session and they don't really take anything from it. So that's something I've taken from him. And then, like, the obvious one, again, with his incredible attention to detail, I'd like to think I've taken a lot from him regarding that. He's been big on, I think, creating situations in training that are real and making sure that it always relates back to the 11v11 game. Work ethic, standards, discipline, commitment, like what you'd class as really old school values that I still think are really prevalent in the modern day game. Irrespective of how the game has evolved and technological changes and all the different tools that we have to our disposal now as coaches, those sort of standards and values on a human level, I think I've tried to make sure that I've always coached with. But then there's also loads of things that, I'll be honest, Gary, I don't agree. I maybe don't agree with him on. The way that maybe he would structure his training week, the way that some of his training sessions would look, I wouldn't do them now personally. And that's what, I always try and go back to as a coach. How can we steal certain things from coaches? So again, I'd like to think I'm really curious and have this growth mindset and want to continue to learn and get better. So you always look at how can you take certain things from different people. All right, I might take that. How does that look for me? Maybe I adapt it a little bit to my style. But then you also learn a lot of what not to do as well. And that's not me being disrespectful, but that's just, again, who are you as a person? Who are you as a human being, as a coach, as a leader, so that whatever you're delivering, it's authentic to you and your style. So I would be silly not to tap into my dad's experience and knowledge, because he's been there, and everything that I'm going through and will continue to go through as a coach, he's probably experienced it. Don't want to bore you, but how do you deal with owners and sporting directors and agents and dealing with the media? Like, he's been there and he's had those experiences. And when you've got a father that's done that, you'd be silly not to tap into it. But I would still like to think that there's a lot of the things that I believe in maybe aren't quite in his playbook, if you like.
Yeah, God, I bet there's a good discussion, a after dinner discussions that
Yeah.
yeah.
Yeah, there's certainly some good healthy disagreements sometimes where
Brilliant.
I might have to call him a dinosaur now and again, but we laugh about it. Yeah.
Quality.
Yeah.
You can hear that you've got obviously a great level of empathy for coaches and respect for the craft of coaching. I imagine, and this is another area that I don't think we talk about enough, and I think it's really interesting. And the final whistle goes, and it can be a very, very lonely job, particularly when the result doesn't go your way. All that abuse in person and then social media. How do you have any processes currently post game with Pablo, or how you manage and maneuver around that process?
Yeah, I think it comes down to you getting a quick understanding of, again, if you're an assistant, of what the head coach, what his reactions are to wins and losses and draws, and understanding, do they want space where just let them be and let them have a little bit of a rant and just keep your mouth shut, or do they want you to start to provoke discussion? Now, I just think for each individual in question here, it's going to change. For us, it's actually there's been certain games where it's been more of a discussion, but we're waiting for Pablo to start the discussion. A week or so ago, we actually watched a little bit of the game back. Now, as an assistant, it's not your job there to think that process is correct or incorrect. Your job in that moment is to provide support. And I've been fortunate to obviously have sat in both seats as a head and as an assistant. And I think having a group of staff that are there to support you, whether you want space and time and silence, whether you want heated discussion, whether you want to watch a little bit of the video. I just think you have to show a real large amount of empathy, Gary, in these situations. And ultimately, it's what the head coach wants that's going to keep him sane at that moment in time. And then obviously, as you start to debrief 1 or 2 days after, I always think things are clearer. For me personally, I think in those moments, it just needs to be space, decompress, breathe. If you want to have a little bit of discussion, great. But for everybody in the room to understand that emotions are high and certain things that might get said in that room might not turn out to be completely correct or accurate once you've kind of watched the game back in the cold light of day. So I don't know if I've answered the question clearly enough, but I just think there needs to be this real empathy and understanding of what does the head coach want, taking the temperature and making sure that he feels supported in that moment, which I think at the end of the day is the most important role of an assistant, especially when maybe the result hasn't gone your way.
I think it's so interesting. Like, I think that's a brilliant answer, but I think it's an art to be when you can go down a path of, if you antagonize or go the other way with that you could do more harm than good. You could be in there for 4 hours. Yeah.
No, I always feel that if you not necessarily disagree, Gary, but I think if there's something in the game that you feel is a real point of emphasis that needs to be looked at and corrected, I always feel that the Monday morning is probably the best time to address that. I just think once the emotions have calmed down and everybody's had just time to stew on it, because again, things can get emotional and things can get said, and then you start to get people feeling different feelings and where's everyone's motives at. And so again, just me personally, I always think that just needs to be a space. Maybe you have a rant and you say some things, get you some things off your chest. But with the real detail and the specifics of probably more strategy, game plan, in-game changes, I just think those things you need a little bit more time to stew on them and have those conversations when everybody's in probably more of a stable emotional state. on a Monday or a Tuesday or whenever your first day back in at the offices.
What's your post game, like your day after, or maybe you just said there about watching the game? Like, do you have a process for 24 hours where you go through and sit down and?
Yeah. So I'll always watch the game back if we play on a Saturday. I'll always watch the game back on a Sunday, depending on what my day looks like with my family. Usually it'll probably be a Sunday evening where I'll watch the game back. And sometimes it's taken me up to 3 hours to watch it back, to be honest, because I'll clip and you rewind and you look at certain things and you want to make sure that you've got certain moments of the game pulled out for the analyst to potentially dress up to show in the recap when we're next in things to talk to Pablo about. But then just to make sure that when you are communicating your thoughts, that you're really clear. So I'll always watch the game back. We actually get sent quite a lot of data on the Sunday. We'll usually get that sent on a Sunday morning, like performance metrics, but then we'll also get GPS data sent. I don't look at them until I've watched the game. So what I don't want to look at the stats, and then I've already started to build an unconscious idea of what the game looked like and thoughts. And so I want to watch the game just purely for the game. Once I've watched the game, then I'll go and have a look at the stats and certain metrics and go, okay, does this support what I was seeing? Thankfully, the majority of the time is yes. Sometimes it might not be. So then sometimes I might have to go, all right, well, maybe we'll have to have another look at that tomorrow morning. So that's how we do it here. Is the staff is kind of split, out of possession, in possession. The coaches will kind of clip what they need to clip regarding their moment, their side of the ball, and then we'll kind of put all the clips together. Usually our week restarts on a Tuesday, so the players will get Sunday, Monday off. We'll have a staff call on a Monday to debrief the game as a collective. That's technical staff and front office staff as well, where we'll talk about the game plan, what went well, what didn't go well, in-game changes, personnel, performances, kind of get our thoughts out as a staff, which I think has been really healthy for us. And then Tuesday morning we'll deliver the debrief or the recap on video to the team, go through again some in possession, some out of possession, some positives, and then some potential areas of improvement. But yeah, I've always found, and again, everyone's different, Gary, and again, through the years of experience and figuring out what works for you, I've always preferred to watch the game back the day after, again, where you're in a little bit more of an stable emotional state. And then you've got stats and metrics to go, okay, well, that can support us regards to how we want the game to look for us in the different moments.
All right, last three for you. The LinkedIn post that you had recently about 3 cups, professional, personal, family.
Yeah.
Very, very difficult in elite level football to those 3 cups. Usually it's one of them's overflowing.
Yeah.
How do you do it?
Oh, it's incredibly difficult. I would like to think I've got a little bit better as I've got older. I think just being intentional about making sure that when I'm with my family, I'm with them and I'm present. And I'll be honest with you, Gary, it's way more difficult when you're a head coach. Because it is literally 24/7. You've got 101 things going through your mind. As an assistant, it's a little bit easier to switch. You don't have the constant stream of people wanting you for media. Players got a family issue. Certain players going to have to go for a scan because they've got an injury. You've got a sporting director that wants to talk about something. So that it's been probably a little bit easier as an assistant regards to family. I've got 2 young children. I've got a 9-year-old boy and an 11-year-old daughter. And I've got a wife that's incredibly supportive, that as we've moved states 3 or 4 times now in the last 12 years since we've been here. And I think that again is so important for coaches, is to have a supportive and an understanding family. And my boy is is football mad, so I try and make sure I take him to as many of his training sessions and get to as many of his games as possible. My daughter's big into her dance and gymnastics, so anytime I can even just drop her off at dance and just spend 10 minutes in the car with her, for me is invaluable. And obviously same with my wife. Now the kids have gone back to school. Hopefully on the day off, I'll be able to go and have lunch with my wife at some point and spend some better time with her. And so I think for me, it's again, this constant self-reflection. I found journaling to be important as well. And just to try and every now and again, just catch yourself. Okay. Have I made sure I've spent enough time with the kids? When I'm with them, am I present? But then I'm ambitious. I want to try and be the best coach I can possibly be. So in order to do that, there's certain sacrifices that I know need to be made regarding just hours. As we know, working at the professional level is extremely demanding. The hours that you're arriving, the hours that you're leaving, incredibly unsociable. It's not a normal job. The travel that we have to go through here in the States as well is extensive. And then when I'm in work, obviously making sure that I'm executing my responsibilities to the best of my ability, but then how can I continue to grow as well? And this is, I heard it from a couple of different people, that contacts at different clubs, of people trying to almost pigeonhole a certain amount of hours a week that is purely for their self-development. So maybe it might be on a Friday afternoon for me, for example, when the work's done for the week, how can I maybe spend an hour or two watching an Arsenal game, for example? It might be reading a book. Every morning when I go for my workout, I'm listening to a different podcast. So how can I continuously make sure that I'm improving and developing whilst giving my best to Real Salt Lake, or the club that I'm working at, and then trying to make sure that I'm spending quality time with my family, because that's still the most important thing for me. I don't know the right answer. I can't sit here and say I've got it right, Gary, because I'm sure if you spoke to my wife and kids, they'd probably tell you I haven't. But I think just, again, through experiences, you're just trying to be a little bit more intentional about filling up those 3 cups. And yeah, even like someone was asking me the other day, how many times have you played golf in Salt Lake? I love golf. I haven't played. So how can I maybe get a few hours for me to now go and play golf just for my own mental health? I use my morning hour or 45 minutes in the gym as almost like I'm ticking a box for my mental health, my physical health. I'm listening to a podcast, so you try and multitask. And again, I don't know what the answer is. It's different for everybody. But I just think for our mental health and our sanity, it's so important that we try and get this balance. And you hear stories of coaches that don't have that. A really well-respected, high-profile coach, I asked him, how do you get balance? And he said, there isn't any balance. If you want to get to the top, your family and your personal life, you have to park. Now, certain people will agree with that. Certain people will disagree with that. So it's just really interesting. Even like I remember seeing an interview with Bobby Robson, and someone was asking him about his life and his career, and he said that one of his biggest regrets, he didn't spend enough time with his kids. Now, really interesting reflection. And for me now, you go, okay, well, how can I make sure that I'm not missing out on my kids growing up? The flip side of that is, would Bobby Robson have got to the level he got to had he have spent more time with his kids? We'll never know. I think we've probably got an idea what the answer might be. So it's, what are you willing to give up? What do you want? And I always try and go back to like my purpose as a human being. I want to be the best father, the best husband, and the best coach I can be. So how do I continuously keep trying to fill up in those areas? And I don't know if I've got the right answer. And I would love to hear from people that feel like they have, and how it looks differently.
Yeah. Oh, we could do a separate podcast on this one.
Of course, yeah.
The phone ringing again. I've seen it. Of the general manager role, and not to say again with empathy, a very, very hard role. You've got investors, you've got boards. So that person that's facilitating in there is another layer of communication for a head coach. But I'm sure a lot of people, because it's such a new role, are dealing with growing pains of someone who might have an opinion or someone who might have a difficulty seeing it from their perspective. What advice, not necessarily go into your own experiences, but
Yeah.
generally, what advice would you have for someone on managing up effectively?
Yeah, there's a few things to this, Gary. It's a great topic. I just think with the right at the beginning, first question you asked about changes and in coaching over the years and playing, I think probably one of the things I didn't speak about was the amount of layers now. I mean, specifically at our club, we have obviously an ownership group. There's a sporting director, there's a technical director, there's an assistant general manager. So you've got just more people involved that you have to report to. I think the first thing is alignment. So I think before you go in, and this is something I've learned firsthand, and I won't go into too much detail, but I think going in somewhere, you have to be really clearly aligned on what success looks like. So are you on the same page with your cultural values? Are you on the same page with what you want the training environment to look like? Are you on the same page with how you expect players to be treated? Are you on the same page with recruitment, with style of play? Because I think so many times, and I speak to different coaches and people around the game that just want a job and they're maybe not aligned. And as I said, I've experienced this close hand as well. And it ends in tears, mate, because quickly, once you get into the rhythm of games and then pressure starts to build because there's points at stake and fans aren't happy and there's people on social media are complaining and maybe you're not in the position of the table you wanted to be in because you're not singing off the same hymn sheet. You're not aligned. So I do think one of the most important questions any young coach can ask a sporting director, a technical director, an owner is, what does success look like? What are your expectations of me? What do you want from me on a daily basis? So that, again, you're going into it eyes wide open. And I think if you're really, really open and honest and transparent and you're on the same page going in, then you can hold those standards and those values and those expectations, you can hold each other accountable to those. If not, then it becomes extremely difficult. The other thing I think with this is we have to, as coaches, understand that, again, social media pressure, owners want success, they want results, same with sporting directors. They've all got big egos. I think sometimes you have to just shut your mouth and open your ears. And that's, again, for me, just lessons learned, is the power of listening, the power of like understanding you've got two ears and one mouth for a reason. So if they want to have a rant and they want to give their opinion, let them have it. Sometimes the worst thing you can do is go back and argue, and then it becomes confrontational. So I think understanding that, close your mouth, open your ears, let them have their space to talk. And then we actually just touched upon it actually with data and statistics. And I think coaches, you can use that to your advantage at times. Because again, I think, for example, a club director or an owner, and you've just lost a game 2-0, but you actually played well. Maybe somebody switched off a set play, a referee makes a mistake. You've actually done a lot of things well in the game, but the outcome hasn't gone your way. And you have to take a phone call or you have to sit in a meeting where you get all these things thrown at you. If you can have facts and evidence there to go, actually, we actually performed well today. Like our KPIs were met. Couple of things that maybe didn't go our way. And I've found through experiences that can be really powerful. And an owner can actually go, because the majority of owners like numbers, they like stats, they like data, they like factual evidence. They can actually go, he's actually got a point here. Then you start to educate as well. And I think, again, there's so many different things that go into this, and educating maybe certain people that don't have experience of professional football in certain scenarios, again, is massively important. But just good old communication. And understanding that your role as a head coach sometimes is going to be to take flack. You're taking flack from the media, you're taking flack from the fans, you're going to take flack from owners, and you have to be resilient. For us to have a long career and have longevity, you have to be resilient. You have to have thick skin. You have to understand you're going to get criticized, and you have to be big enough and strong enough and bold enough to accept it. And then at times go, okay, great, but I'm so strong in my beliefs and what I think are going to allow or give this team the best chance to be successful, and you keep driving forward.
Yeah, it's probably the most overlooked thing. Like we all, as a coaching community, adore Pep Guardiola, but it gets overlooked how much he stood whenever he got a lot of noise around when he arrived at City. Yeah,
Exactly.
Yeah, brilliant.
No, I think blocking out the noise, Gary, is huge, because as we said at the beginning, there's so much of it now. Again, even like just for players have got so much available to them now, like Y-Scout platforms, clips. You hear stories about players having individual coaches away from the training ground that are going through clips with them. There's so much available, like the analysis now that you watch the English Premier League, for example, and the analysis that goes before and during and after, and we forget players are watching that as well. So they, like, a lot of them maybe think that they've got all the answers. And like your man on the street, fans that will go down the pub and watch the game. And again, everybody, and that's, again, what makes this game brilliant is there's so many different opinions, there's so many different ways of doing it. Everybody thinks they've got all the answers. Yeah. And we as coaches are the ones that are in the thick of it, and knee deep in it sometimes. And that's, again, you have to accept it. For me, it's you park it, listen to the people the opinions of people that you trust in and around your own environment, and believe your own eyes of what you're seeing in training every day and through your own game footage. As I said, and stick being authentic and being true to who you are. Because I think the other things as well, you start to go off track and maybe start to do things that maybe aren't authentic to you. And players are not stupid, Gary. Like they'll sniff it out and smell it straight away.
Anthony, outstanding. Thank you so much.
No, brilliant, mate. I really enjoyed that. Thank you for having me.